Hello there, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's APMG webinar. My name's Mark Constable. I'll be your host and moderator, and I'm delighted to be joined by our regular guest presenter, Melanie Franklin. Some of you will be familiar with Melanie from previous webinars, but for the benefit of those that aren't, Melanie's a Director of Agile Change Management Limited and an experienced practitioner, trainer and consultant in all things project, program and change management. In today's session, Melanie's going to address some fundamentals of Agile as despite increasing popularity, many organisations and professionals are having difficulties in understanding exactly what Agile means for them and how they best go about transitioning from an old way of working to a brave new Agile world. And as co-chair of the Change Management Institute's UK chapter, Melanie will also focus on why effective change management is so often critical to successful Agile working. So before we get into the detail, please bear with me a few moments while I quickly cover a bit of housekeeping. So the first point is we are recording the session today, and everyone that's registered will receive a follow-up email as soon as we've got the registration and slides online. Secondly, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them in your control panel. They'll come through to me, and I'll be monitoring those as we go through, and we'll try and address as many as we can towards the end. We've got a few poll questions throughout as well, so look out for those. They'll pop up on some screen, and we'll warn you when those are coming up. And last but not least, feedback. So if you have any feedback on a session, you've got my email address on screen, and also in the follow-up emails. That's very valuable to us when it comes to planning and delivering webinars in the future. Okay, that's all from me until we get to some questions. So welcome, Melanie, and over to you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I think the whole point of this webinar is just to make sure that we all come up onto the same page in terms of what we're talking about with Agile, because it's talked about all the time. It's still very, very trendy. Lots of organisations are thinking about implementing it. So let's just make sure we all understand what we're talking about. Before I get started, I have got two poll questions because I like to get to know the audience. So the first one is going to be what your role is. And I think Mark's putting it on the screen right now.
Yep, that one's on screen now. So yeah, a few options there as to what best describes your current role. We got about
and as usual, you're going to read them out to me, yeah, because I can't see them.
No problem. So we've got about 80% votes in, with around 48% project program managers, 3% sponsors or senior operational managers, 12% change managers, 36% other.
Okay, well, gosh, the other, that leaves the door wide open, doesn't it? And the next thing is your level of knowledge.
Okay, so that's on screen now as well. So how would you describe your Agile expertise? We've got a few options there. And we've got around half, just under 50% same practitioner level. 36% informed. 10-11% novice.
Okay.
4 to 5% master.
Oh, okay. I will query, guys, why 4 to 5% of you masters are on an Agile Demystified, but hopefully I won't be boring for you. I'm going to start with the basics. So the first thing is Agile means so much to so many different people in an organization. Depending on the role that somebody's playing, it will mean different things. Certainly in the boardrooms that I sit in, I am very well aware that there is no what we might call technical understanding of Agile. Certainly there are very few people who have had any kind of qualification in it. When they are referring to Agile, it really is about fast to market is often one of the things that they're talking about, how they can address uncertainty in an ever more uncertain world. They see it as a way of being very flexible and being able to react very quickly to changing circumstances. And as a result of that, they can change course easily based on new information as it comes in. They can improve their competitiveness. And so for me, that's a sort of organizational or strategic sort of viewpoint of Agile. They just want that sort of fast, flexible response. I think what's interesting, though, about this higher level Agile is that it's not always matched by the understanding of what's involved. And the issue is that traditional hierarchies governance structures and the way that decisions are taken at the top really rather prevent effective agile working. You know, we need to be moving towards an organizational culture that perhaps is replaced by clearly defined decision-making criteria so that people can be genuinely empowered further down their organizations to take decisions. Not everything should have to be escalated up through a hierarchy. That we should move from information hoarding, and information is power, to an environment where actually we share information and we're very transparent about what we're doing and what we're up to. And that we celebrate the idea of experimenting and learning through sometimes failure and sometimes success. Getting commitment, as I'm sure all of you on the call have had different experiences of, getting that commitment to making those changes is very difficult. So there is usually a conflict between the desire for this agility and actually the reality of making it happen. Where there has been a lot of movement in organizations is in what I would call the more tactical agile. And we're going to look at lots of different brands later on, but certainly this idea of perhaps working in a more incremental way. I'm going to deliver things piecemeal and iteratively. So I'm going to add more features and functions as I further develop them. I'm going to improve all the time on what I'm doing. The number of times when I talk about agile that people want to talk to me about how does this align with continuous improvement. So organizationally, continuous improvement is still a very big theme. And of course, agile is, in fact, I would say it's an approach to delivering continuous improvement. It's baked into the principles of agile, but it's certainly something we need to think about. I think that this more tactical agile also at a project level involves working much more closely with the business who are going to use whatever's created. So there's a whole issue around not creating a them and us environment, but as often quoted in many of the textbooks, the one team culture. I think many people understand this idea of sprints. They don't really understand the bigger concepts behind it, but they get the idea that within their organization, there are people who are delivering things in sort of small boxes of time every couple of weeks, for example. And of course, we shouldn't ignore the fact that nearly everybody who's working in Agile is keeping the 3M company going with their use of Post-it notes. So there are very different understandings of how we approach it, but why is it such a hot topic? And I think I wanted to reflect on why there is this sort of demand for Agile, is that overarching is this uncertainty. We're in a very uncertain world. We have a desire for an easy answer, but there aren't any silver bullets. You can't say, if I do this, this will definitely happen. And as soon as you move away from that certainty, you start to realize that perhaps Agile is the obvious answer. Because if you don't know for definite what the answer is, why don't you evolve the answer? Try a little bit, see what the results are, and find out if you're heading in the right direction. So it seems to me that Agile is a hot topic because actually there's a commonsensical answer to why we want to work in a more Agile way. It absolutely fits the way that the 21st century seems to be panning out, which is that there's a huge increase in the number of things we might do. There's a huge increase in the volume of change because as the interconnectedness between various systems and processes we use means that if you try to make a small change, you can't. There's a domino effect, and that therefore one small change triggers hundreds of other changes because everything's interconnected. So we've already got that sort of complexity. We've got social media and the use of the internet driving much greater demand for engagement with customers and a much greater speed at which they can respond to things. Things can go viral and organizations can be caught on the hop if they haven't got a response. If they haven't got a sort of agile way of working where they are seeking out what those responses are and are ready to reply to them, then they are often in serious trouble. And the PR, the negative PR that can take over can be very, very damaging for them. So we've got high volume of ideas as well. We're always being told to be more innovative, but of course the lifespan of those ideas is pretty low, constantly being replaced. So I think it comes back to this, really, I don't know exactly what's expected of me, and I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I better do something. And so incremental delivery, iterative delivery, the cornerstones of Agile probably are the things that make the most sense. I think it's worth mentioning though, and I will give a shout out to McKinsey now, in that they do publish some really interesting things around agile working at a very strategic level, in that the sort of papers that they're producing are providing some of the statistical data-driven analysis that indicates that agile is the right way to be going. And I think that feeds this more strategic approach to agile as well, as you can see in there, in terms of the sort of this is the stability versus the dynamism of organizations. And you don't want to be in an organization that's trapped down there in the bottom with sort of the unstable practices, so lack of reliability, but also you're not very speedy and very responsive. There's an awful lot of evidence that suggests that those with a more agile approach to how they work are in the top quartile for all sorts of measures, from employee engagement, customer satisfaction, to profitability. So I think it's worth thinking about how some of this data that's out there is starting to feed the view that agile is definitely the way to go. But certainly I don't see anything about agile dropping off as a hot topic anytime soon. And I think it's worth thinking about the fact that actually agile gives us a number of very clear benefits. If you're working alongside those that are going to use what you're delivering, then you're less likely to build the wrong solution. If you have got a mechanism by which you're sourcing their feedback and you are acting on their feedback, then if you are going down the wrong path and they're telling you that, you can course correct. I think that we are looking at this iterative development and the incremental development as giving us an early return on investment. At the end of the day, one of the things that's really advantageous about agile is that, and I see this from my sitting at a sort of director level, is that what I'm not expected to do now is perhaps fund the full life cycle before seeing any kind of return. Instead, what I'm seeing is that perhaps fairly early on, something from an initiative is actually fixing a problem we've got or exploiting an opportunity that we have, but it's certainly delivering to me some cost benefit. It might be cost reduction, it might be revenue increase, but it's certainly doing something valuable for me very early in the life cycle. Whereas in more traditional approaches, I'm going to fund the whole of the requirements gathering life cycle, the full design, development and test life cycle until we've got something that is sort of complete and can be released and start being used. There's nothing wrong with that approach, but it does change the funding cycle. I have to fund for a much longer period of time. Whereas with Agile, I'm going to get something back much earlier. And of course, we've just talked about the greater flexibility by not following a detailed plan from start to finish. As information is received about the workability of what's being produced, the response from customers and new ideas that come out, all of those things we can respond to. So it's quite important that I think we understand that there are lots of benefits of Agile, but maybe what we need to understand, therefore, is how we make it work. I'm going to come back to the benefits because I think there's a lot of organisations that aren't necessarily getting the benefits from Agile, and I want to look at what is getting in their way. But first, let's just make sure we're all up to speed on some of the basics about how it works. So I think planning is very different because what we're doing is, as you can see here, the plan isn't filled in. You may have your full initiative and you've identified how long you want to be spending time on it, but what you're not doing is you're not planning from the bottom up and getting all the requirements in and laying it out from end to end. Now, this enables us to be very responsive, but again, I'm very, very aware that in the boardroom, you put this kind of sort of agile initiative in front of people, and they're very concerned that they don't know what exactly it is they're paying for. And when we say that things are going to evolve, that just makes people incredibly nervous. So there are advantages to this kind of planning, but as we're going to look at the back end of this webinar, there are also a number of concerns. So let's look at the real thing here, which is that I understand that I've got an initiative that I want to do. What I've got to do first of all is break it into chunks. I'm breaking something into small projects because I'm saying, right, I'm going to deliver fairly early on. Maybe within the first couple of months of a 6-month project, I'll have something out there that my customers can really use. I will have fixed a particular issue that's really bothersome for them at the moment. if I'm going to give myself a couple of months to get out to the market with something, I want to make sure that I hit those deadlines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide it up to something even smaller and more focused. We could call it a sprint. We can call it a time box. I rather like the idea of time boxes, actually boxes of time. I think it's very descriptive. But the whole idea of this sprint or box of time is that over the next 2 or 3 weeks, I'm actually going to fixate on delivering something. So whatever that X is, and it's going to be part of the thing that I want my customers to be able to use. But I've worked backwards and I've worked out what are the constituent parts, and that's what I'm going to focus on. So it's a very different way of planning, because what you're doing is you're taking the whole thing that you're trying to create and you break it down into its constituent parts, and maybe then even break it down to the level below that, so that you're absolutely clear, this is the thing that I'm now going to create. So you work through the plan in that way, with the idea that if you deliver something that's really valuable within a couple of months of a 6-month project, and actually that actually fixes the problem and everyone's really happy, you might have lots of other things that you wanted to do and you thought would be valuable and useful, but actually the customers are all saying, no, that's fine, thanks, we don't need any more. So it's also that idea that Agile initiatives can finish early, because if they do deliver what's needed, there's no need to keep going. You don't need to keep adding to everything. It's not like the more traditional projects where nothing's finished until you've completed all the requirements and glued everything together. So this is another way that you start to see that flexibility. But it requires a very different focus. What I found when I started moving into more agile ways of working was this real focus on, I've got to deliver things. Things have got to be different. I can't tell people that I'm busy, that I've been doing all of these things. The game in Agile is to say, yes, but what have I created for you? What can you start using? It's a very different emphasis, and I think it brings different pressures. Again, we'll have a chat about that in just a moment. If I'm going to look at this from a sort of planning perspective, then I need to think, well, what's actually happening in each of those sprints? So I'm saying over 2 to 3 weeks, I'm going to deliver something. Well, okay, well, what is that something? And how does that fit with everything else that's going on? So what I'm really interested in is collecting. I'm still collecting requirements. Some of the things around more traditional methods haven't changed. We still need to discuss what it is we're trying to create. But what I really like in Agile is that we're creating requirements in this this is a format called a user story. And you are writing it from the perspective of a user, a real person, a real role. And you're trying to imagine how they might get some value out of what it is you're going to create. So you start to think, well, as a marketing manager, for example, or as a finance administrator, so you really are having to think through, who are we delivering this for? So it makes sure that you've got a customer, if you like, that is very customer centric. So I think that's something that perhaps we need to pull out and think about. That Agile, through this idea of a user story, actually puts the customer front and center, because you are always thinking, I'm going to create something because I know the customer will want this. And then you have to be very clear about what is it that you're creating. So what is it that they need? Notice I haven't used the word want there, but they need something. So as a finance administrator, I need this process to be automated so that, and then we get into the benefit. So if we're going to automate something, maybe so that I can stop entering the data into Excel, which takes up half my week, so that I can spend more time on the phone to customers answering their queries, so that customer satisfaction increases, so that more customers buy more from us, more customers recommend us to other customers. I think it's very interesting that what we've got in this user story, the genius of it, is that it forces you to look at the benefits, the value of what it is you're creating. And if you cannot write that piece, if it's not clear, then it's not going to be something that we'll end up doing. I think it's rather brilliant, because often we work with people who, because of their hierarchy, are able to say that they want something. Now, without being rude, if you can sit down with them using this format and work through exactly what they've asked for, so you're clarifying with them, yes, but who's going to use it? Who actually wants this thing? You've had the great idea, yes, but who within your staff actually needs to use it? How is it going to change how they work? So what exactly is the need? What exactly is going to change? And then work through several loops of the benefit. Note that I went through the so that, you know, I can stop spending my time entering data into Excel, so that I can spend more time with the customer, so that the customer gets more satisfaction, so that they recommend us to more people. If you notice how many sort of loops you go through to get to the ultimate benefit, and that's a great game to play with those that you're working with, to make sure that everybody's clear, this is actually worthwhile, or, oh, that's not as good an idea as I thought it was to begin with. So I really like using user stories, this format, to help work out exactly what it is we're doing. And it can get rid of things. It's a great sort of sieving mechanism, because if you really can't fill in the so that, or you're not really clear who the stakeholder is, then you go back to the drawing board. So the stakeholder means that you're really thinking and engaging with your users, your customers. The requirement means you're really focusing on an achievement. And the benefit means that there's a real driver for change. So something very simple in Agile, but really drives what it is that we're trying to achieve in terms of customer focus, early return on investment, doing things that are beneficial and valuable. And going back to this sprint, as you can see on the left here, what I put up is that there's a user story. But crucially, I've thought about the priority of that user story, because whatever I'm going to deliver in Agile, I'm going to deliver on time. So that I'm going to focus on making sure that we're saying that we're going to have something ready by a certain date, that it will be. So I'm making sure that, first of all, I know what that thing is, that we've got a great user story. But I know that I'm working on the most valuable things at any one time, because we've gone through this idea of prioritization. What I've got here is a sort of template, if you like, for what's called a prioritized requirements list. I love the simplicity. The secret's in the name, really, isn't it? It's requirements and they're prioritized. It's also known in other Agile methods as a product backlog. That's an interesting concept. Basically, the backlog is exactly the same. It's a list of things that are still outstanding that are to be done, and it will get prioritized. But obviously, that's not in the name. But I'm very conscious around the world that I know a lot of executives who get very sort of angry with this idea of the product backlog. Backlog is not a good word for them. It sounds like we're running late already. So just be cautious. Prioritized requirements list is a great description and probably helps you. So what we've got here is we will have a whole list. So on the left, we've got customer interview, but we might have lots of other things that we're working on that we have to deliver all the way down. So we're constantly adding to that as new ideas come up. And what we're doing, though, is we are prioritizing them against each other, so that in any sprint, and I'm just going to go back, in any sprint, I am going to deliver X, and X is made up of the most important things at that moment in time. And when I've delivered on the first X, and I'm starting to think, what work will I deliver in the next sprint that will add to that will help us create something useful by the end of the increment? I'll go back to my prioritized requirements list and make sure that everything's been reshuffled, and that what's coming to the surface is the must-haves. So I need to think very clearly, what does must-have mean? So prioritization is really an important driver of what's going on in terms of Agile. So if we go back, so we've got some choices. Must have, that's an essential. What that means is that it really does create value. It maybe aligns to the strategy. If we create this thing, it will make sure that we are doing the things we said we were going to do. Maybe something's a must have because without it, the thing just won't work. Or in fact, it might work, but it might not be to a legal standard of some kind. Sometimes you will have to put things into that must-have column because their time has come. They are a blocker to everything else getting done. So if we can get this thing done, then it will help other things get done. The most important thing is that there is absolute transparency about what that makes something a must-have. Now, I think when you look at this prioritization, by the way, some people shorten it to Moscow for the M, and then if you put a little O and then an SC and then a little O and then W, you'll see that it would be Moscow. But for me, I'm increasingly interested in the top and the bottom one, in that it's actually is something a must-have, and there are other things that come up as great ideas, but they genuinely don't fit what it is we're trying to create and the difference we're trying to make. We don't want to be rude about those ideas. We don't want to ditch them straight away, but we'll say, well, okay, but we won't have them this time. They don't really fit into what we're trying to do. In practical terms, the should have and the could have, well, they, you know, the should have is something I really want, but it's not vital, it's not essential. We can actually live without it, but I really want it because I think it will make things look better, feel better, or operate better. And then, of course, the could haves are the nice to haves. I'm finding increasingly that the only thing that really matters is there's almost a dividing line beneath must-have, and unless it goes into the must-have column, then you can forget it, because there is so much competition for our time these days that the thing that we must concentrate on is just sifting out those things that are essentials. Sometimes what you want to do to make sure that actually in this incremental delivery that we're doing with Agile, it'll be a good idea if we perhaps broke the original sort of requirement, the original user story, down into sub-requirements. And if we're going to do some interviews for customers, we might recognise that perhaps we could do that for UK, if we're based in the UK, and then everybody else, overseas customers. And the crucial thing there is that we can then start to have a look and go, well, okay, but the priority out of those two subdivisions is the UK customers must be interviewed. So that becomes the must-have. And then that's when you start to say, well, when's that going to be done? Increment 1, time box, or sprint number 1. So your prioritized requirements list makes you very focused, I think, on exactly what it is I'm going to do when I'm going to do it, so that there's no misunderstandings. So simple concepts, but very, very important ones. Now, if I can just summarize, we've had a look at this idea of the planning, we've had a look at the user stories, the requirements, and we've had a look at the prioritization. So that gives us a sort of feel of some of the key things that are happening. I wanted to do some terminology busting while I was here as well. So hopefully we now know about Moscow prioritization, and we know about user stories, we know about sprints, and we know that they're the same as time boxes, and we know that there's a prioritized requirements list, and we know that that's the same as the product backlog that's sometimes talked about. So that's given us a few of the basics, but let's have a look at about the fact that we mustn't forget that Agile is a different way of working. So those are all sensible things that I've called out so far. But let's have a look at how Agile works in a different way, if you like. Agile turns our traditional approach to delivering new ideas on its head. Instead of gathering all the requests, all the requirements up front, and then working out how they all fit together. So as you can see the top diagram here, I'll gather all those jigsaw pieces. I'll work out, how they all fit together, and then that's what I'm going to deliver. And I'm going to deliver that at the end in one big heap. So it all fits together, and it all, it is exactly what's required. And that sounds like a really good thing. So that makes sense. Yeah. But Agile, very different. I still want the value. I still want the success. Yeah, but what I do is I turn it completely on its head, and we have a really big talk about exactly what problem we're trying to solve, what value we're trying to achieve before we do anything else. So it really is talking in a much bigger picture to begin with. You start to sort of say, yeah, but what's the problem here? Why are we bothering even dealing with this? How important is this problem compared to all the other things we're trying to sort out? But once we're all in agreement and we've scoped it properly, so there's a huge value in having these conversations and saying exactly what is it that we want to do. And you might even run sessions where you're talking to your customers, your users, and saying, well, what is it that we want to do? And is there something we definitely don't want to do as part of this? So being absolutely clear what's in scope and what's out of scope. Then what we're doing is we have lots of different ideas. As you can see, there's lots of different jigsaw puzzles. Which one do we really want to go with? And we might go to that one on the right and go, okay, we've had a look at all the different ideas, but we're clear that this sort of simple jigsaw, this 4-piece jigsaw there, brightly coloured, that's the one that's going to give us the right value for what we've been discussing. So then we make a move, and then we start to actually deliver incrementally, knowing that the yellow piece perhaps is going to solve some of the customers' most annoying problems up front, and then the red piece, we'll get onto that because that will be really useful for us internally to make something more lean and more efficient. And then we go on, and then we'll do the green piece, and you can start to see that actually what we're doing is we edge towards it. And at any point, it might be after that we've delivered the third piece of that jigsaw, we realize that we've done it, we've cracked it. We've solved some of the customers' problems, we've improved our own internal approach and processes, and we've given customers other things that they want to buy, and we're getting increased revenue. We don't need the blue piece. The blue piece was always a nice to have, and now we've realised we can stop at that point. But it's a different way of thinking about things, and the old ways were to sort of gather the requirements up front, and then work from there. But the new ways, you've got to brainstorm your ideas based on what value you want, and be prepared to develop only part of them, get the feedback and see what works before you move on. Another way that Agile is different is that if we accept that we're working sort of almost on its head backwards, if you like, that the constraints under which we operate, now these become different. This is a different set of rules. I've taken this from the Agile PM handbook from the Agile Business Consortium, as I think it's a really simple way of just showing what really changes. Is that if we are going to let our solution evolve, because we're not really sure what all the features and functions are that we're going to need, so we're going to let that become the variable. That's what's going to change. What we are going to have is we're going to have some kind of constraint, some kind of deliverable that we focus around. And in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to go for time, because it's very important if you want to deliver return on investment that you understand how long you're going to be spending on things, because time is connected to cost. As far as time is concerned, a huge amount of our costs are based on how long we have to stand a team up for. So of course, the longer we take, the greater the cost, because the greater we've got those team members being paid for. So if we can agree, we're going to give this problem 6 months, we're going to put together a team of 10 people for the next 6 months to solve this problem and to get value out to the customers, that becomes the orientation point. From that, and I'm just going to go back, there we go, we've got 6 months in front of us. So now we can start to think, well, maybe I will give myself a couple of months to get something in front of customers in the first increment, another couple of months after that, and another couple of months after that. But you can see already, can't you, that by agreeing a time scale, what we've done is we've got some shape to what we're doing. We've got some structure. If everything remains variable, then it becomes the Wild West. It's absolute chaos. We have to have some orientation point. So let's make sure that we deliver to a certain timeline, and that will help us control the costs. One of the controversial points might be the quality here, in that, as you can see under a traditional approach, there's a claim there that perhaps quality isn't as fixed as we thought it was. And I think that goes back to the fact that if you're doing a lot of your quality testing for whatever it is you're delivering, in a traditional approach, you can't really do that until the end, because you're pulling all the requirements together to make one whole. And it's only when you've got that whole that you can start testing it. And of course, the problem is, if that happens towards the end of the project life cycle, then, well, sometimes a few of those tests get dropped because you're desperately trying not to be late. You might have a little bit of flexibility over time and cost. And in fact, that's what's got project management a bad name, in that sometimes we do deliver late. Just looking at Crossrail and how they were examined in the House of Commons this week for running late yet again. Nobody likes us to run late, and so what tends to happen is maybe we skip a few tests, a few quality checks, just to try to stick to the deadline. So in traditional approaches, sometimes that happens. Whereas in an agile approach, what we're going to do is we can't really do that, because what we're doing is we're going to test the quality of something in every sprint, and it will only go live if it absolutely meets its quality criteria. And so you don't have a whole heap of testing towards the end of your project life cycle. So what we've got here is it's the features that are variable, and that gives us that flexibility to say, well, based on feedback. We can genuinely operate based on feedback, because if we're being told that something doesn't work, then we can adjust to it and say, well, we'll drop that feature, but something else might be even more popular than we thought it was going to be. We think, well, we'll actually do more on that piece then. So that gives you a sort of sense that perhaps Agile is different in the way that we need to think about it. And I wanted to use the last sort of part of this webinar to look at how that gets organisations into trouble. It seems to me that all the things I've talked about so far, Agile is a good news story. It seems a logical and commonsensical way of addressing the great uncertainties that we all face. It gives us the flexibility to address those uncertainties by not promising everything up front and being able to adjust based on the feedback as we continue to roll things out to customers. So why isn't this a great news story? Why aren't organisations perhaps getting the value? In fact, sometimes you talk about Agile and people just look horrified. They are implementing Agile, they are adopting Agile ways, but it doesn't take long for them to start telling you why it's not working in their organisation and all the problems that they're having. So I wanted to sum up some of the problems that I seem to encounter the most. The first is understanding the business value. In order to be able to deliver Agile, you've got to be absolutely clear what is it that you're trying to create. We've sort of talked about the value, the profit, the success, and if you can't have a clear understanding of what difference are we trying to make, then you haven't got the sort of structure on which you can then brainstorm some ideas. You can't sort of chuck out ideas and compare them against, well, will that solve the problem, if you're not really clear what the problem is to begin with. And I think a lot of organisations have a real difficulty in understanding the desired business value. I think that goes to a chronic problem that I experience in the boardroom. Everybody I speak to thinks that the strategy is very clear for their organisation, that the strategic objectives are obvious. But when you go to speak to most people in a company, you find that actually they're not really clear exactly what it is we're supposed to be doing and how it all fits together. So I don't think it's that much of a surprise that people really struggle with trying to create the right business value, because it's not as clear as many of the executives think that it is. Apologies to the 3% of you who are coming in as sponsors and very senior operational leaders on this webinar, but I think that is the truth of the issue. What I have seen go really badly wrong in Agile is people don't get how to deconstruct a big idea. They find it very difficult to look at something and actually break it down into the streams of work that they're trying to do. So what they do is they go back to the old way of trying to go bottom up and actually, well, let's just put the whole system in and then we'll work out how it's going to be used. Actually trying to look at, for example, looking at any kind of system and saying, well, okay, but what bit can we get working on its own independently first? Maybe it'll just tackle a few aspects of our work, but if we can get that up and running, we can always add to it later. But being able to do that deconstruction, I think, is an art form, and I've seen some people very good at it, but the majority of people really do struggle. Thinking like a scientist is about what Agile working really is about. If I just go back to this, is that the bottom stream there is that we are actually experimenting all of the time. We've got an idea, but there's no guarantee that idea is the right one. So what we're doing is we're running a stream of experiments. To think like a scientist, the first thing is you have to have a hypothesis. You have to think, well, okay, this is my take on the world. This is what I think the problem is, and I've got a potential solution. So let me be very clear what I'm trying to solve. In other words, let me be very clear about the value. Let me be very clear about what I think good looks like. What would success look like, so that I can keep checking for success, or that I know that I'm failing. So that might be the customer feedback, it might be the customer take-up rate, it might be the duration of carrying out a task, that you think you're going to slice that in half. But whatever it is, your hypothesis is, this is what I'm going to this is what I'm going to work through. And then you run your experiment, you design a way of proving that concept or disproving it. So you actually come up with an experiment, you design an experiment. Let's try this out. If we try this out, what should we be looking for? What would good look like and what would failure look like? So we're clear on the measures, and then we know that we've had a success or not. So I think there's that scientific thinking that we need to sort of apply. And then the last one there is, and I think this is probably the greatest bugbear for many organisations, is the coping with the unrelenting change that Agile produces. Agile makes sure that at the end of every sprint, certainly, that there's a delivery of something. In fact, I'll go back to this picture here so that we've got it in front of us. Now, we might decide to only release these deliverables as an increment at the end of an increment, at the end of several sprints. We'll pull things together and we've got something meaningful that could then work in front of a customer. But you have a look at this, and I'm looking at a simple 6-month project, and as it's not run along traditional lines, I haven't got one single delivery at the end. Instead, I've got at least 3 deliveries to the business, one at the end of every increment. And in fact, as we continue to develop the plan and run through the life of the project, we might find that in the second increment, we actually are able to deliver things every couple of weeks via a sprint. So already you can start to see that the volume of change from one initiative is already much greater than if it were managed along traditional lines. Well, if you multiply that up with lots of different teams working in agile ways, then what you've got is people in the front line and in the back office of organisations who feel every single day there's a new announcement about how they are supposed to work differently. And this is how I get interested in it from a change management perspective, because it's fairly obvious that actually creating something, I can automate a process far quicker than the person who is now going to do something different. They're going to use their time to make customer calls and handle customer inquiries. It's going to be far easier for me to sort of automate that process and make it run like clockwork than it is for that poor person to learn a whole new way of working, and for that new way of working to become their new norm, their new habit. That's a psychological transition. That's a behavioural change. And how long does it take us to change our behaviour? I started going to a new gym at the beginning of the year, and we're at the end of the first quarter now, so 12 weeks before it starts to become a real habit, and that's about how it feels now. It's now become the new norm for me. I get in the car and I don't think much about it, and I get to the gym and then suddenly I'm in the gym car park and I'm ready to go. But it's taken weeks of going to the same place time and time again before it's become the new norm. So we have a couple of problems. Number one, the sheer volume of these changes that people have to process, and a recognition that their ability to sort of adopt them and adopt these new ways of working that are being triggered all the time takes longer than the creation of new ways of working. So there's always this lag, and eventually they just get to a point where they're in the middle of trying to sort of learn and remember a new way of working when they're asked to do something different over here and something different over there. And eventually they get to a point of just sheer overload. And I think that is, again, one of the issues where we're not seeing the value of Agile. Another terminology busting moment is that at the end of the sprint, we've created something. Well, in some Agile methods, that's called the minimum viable product. It's also known as the minimum usable subset. Minimum. That's quite an interesting word, isn't it? If you're in an operational unit and you get something that's got the absolute minimum number of features and functions, you pretty much know that you're probably going to have to make up the difference with a bit of manual working perhaps, or it'll just be a little bit more convoluted to use because it hasn't got all the features and functions in it. So I am very well aware that I've seen executives go up like a firecracker when you talk about the minimum viable product, because they realise that their staff are going to suffer when they get the minimum of anything. So perhaps one of the things we need to think about is that whilst we can deliver on a sprint by sprint basis, sometimes it's quite important to roll things up into something that is sort of easy to use from a customer point of view, that maybe has got a variety of different features and functions pulled together, so that as a whole they can get something done without having to sort of adjust their brain all of the time. So in summary, I think that you can hear that I absolutely love the Agile way of working. I think it absolutely makes sense, but I'm very well aware that Agile is different, and actually there are a lot of organizations who are really struggling to squeeze the benefit out of Agile because of some of these issues here. They're not stupid. These organizations are not stupid. So if they're struggling with Agile, it might tell us that actually, whilst it sounds simplistic, there are actually a lot of complex threads running through it. The emphasis on the customer, the emphasis on return on investment, the emphasis on continuous feedback, continuous improvement, continuous delivery. These are all things that have the capacity to upset a business. And I think that perhaps one of the indicators that Agile is a lot more complicated than it looks on the surface is perhaps the proliferation of brands. I wanted to close on a last point. Now, this is something I put together at the end of 2017, because on the top right there, I'm a founder signatory of the movement called the Agnostic Agile movement, in that we don't really care what kind of Agile brand you're using. We're just really interested in helping people to work in a more Agile way. And I'm just going to work back from 2017 across, and you can see that there are lots and lots of different things happening within the Agile world. And I'm going to pull out a few things, because there are a few brands in here. So the first thing I want to talk about is the Scrum Alliance. The Scrum Alliance was launched around the beginning of this century, and what you can see there is that they've got quite a few qualifications, things like the Certified Scrum Master, the Certified Product Owner, the Certified Scrum Trainer, the Certified Team Coach. There's a lot of qualifications that they've launched. I'm a big fan of qualifications. I think the more you learn, the better. But it's worth noting that those qualifications are there, and that they put them out role by role. We've also got something on the top there. In 2011, there was the launch of something called the Scaled Agile Framework. Scaled Agile, meaning that instead of just looking at how to run Agile for a particular initiative, what you've got is how it's scaled up. What do you need to do if you're running a variety of teams who are using an Agile approach? And on the right there, at 2013, you can see that something called LESS, Large Scale Scrum, was launched. Down the bottom, from 2010, we had what used to be called the DSDM Consortium, now rebranded as the Agile Business Consortium, launched with APMG their qualification called Agile PM. There's been over 100,000 exams sat in Agile PM, so it's obviously doing something right, and I'm a big fan of their approach. But that was 2010, and shortly afterwards we had the Project Management Institute come along with their Agile Certified Practitioner qualification, and also another brand of Agile called the Disciplined Agile Approach. It's called DAD. So we've got SAFE, the Scaled Agile Approach, we've got SAFE, we've got LESS, we've got DAD, we've got Agile PM, and we've got Scrum. And they are all ways of approaching Agile. When I do my Agile PM training course, I spend a lot of time trying to show how they all fit together, actually, so you get a comprehensive picture. But I think it perhaps goes back to the fact that as these problems are identified, people try to solve these problems, and they try to solve them with yet another way in which you might sort of become more agile. So I think the number of brands should be a hint to us that perhaps, number one, there's a lot of people who want to work in an agile way, and therefore there's clearly a market for lots of different methods and approaches. But secondly, maybe they're proliferating because actually it's not as easy as it looks. And on that basis, I'm going to be taking questions. I'm sure Mark's got a few for me, so we'll spend the last few minutes answering those.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mel. Sure, I've got a few questions. I'm sure a few more coming in as we're going through some of the initial ones. So there's two that I picked out that are very closely related. So the first is Agile more efficient or effective for some specific kinds of projects? And the related one was do all projects and all products benefit from the Agile approach?
Okay, that's a very good thing. And you know, those of you who've heard me before know that I like to go back to the slides so that I can pick up a picture that I can base my answer on. And I think, I'll put this one up. I think that more traditional approaches where we are, actually go to this one, where is it? Where is it? There it is. Right, on the top line here, a more traditional approach that you gather all the requirements up front, you pull them all together as one cohesive piece of work, and then you deliver it, has value. I don't want to get into the idea that Agile solves every problem and that more traditional approaches are evil, because I don't think that's true at all. I think that Agile is inefficient for those initiatives where you absolutely know already and that there's no debate exactly what it is that's required. Because when you do that, then you think, well, why would I apply Agile? Because the thing about an Agile approach is that I'm going to deliver little and often. And the key thing is that I'm going to be sourcing your feedback. I'm trying to have a two-way dialogue with my customer base to find out exactly what it is that they want. What should I build more of? And what should I stop doing because it's not working exactly as they wanted or it's not giving the value? So that two-way feedback loop is actually quite expensive. It takes time. It's a great thing to do. I think we should be doing it. But if you absolutely know exactly what you need to do, and you don't really need to be consulting with lots of different people because their views are already well known and they are just waiting for the solution. If the roof to your house blows off, you want a new roof put on pretty quickly. We don't want to have a big debate about perhaps we could do a more emergent approach where we put a few different slate tiles up and see which ones we like, and then maybe we'll do a little bit more tiling of the roof and see how the chosen tile is working and we want to change it. We're going to have to make some swift decisions, otherwise we're going to have a very damp house. So I think you can sort of see there that certain projects do lend themselves to Agile, and the key underpinning theme there is, do I need customer feedback? Is this something that genuinely we need to do discovery on? Because maybe a word I haven't used yet is in the Agile lifecycle, it's almost a continuous discovery of what we do next. So do I need to do that or not?
Okay, thanks, Phil. I think we've got a Prince 2 person on the call. So what's the difference between sprints and work packages as defined by Prince?
There's lots of different things going on. I think that probably the thing for me that I would highlight is in a sprint, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go back to that diagram, so I've got it in front of me, is that as the project manager, for example, and I've managed both Prince 2 projects and Agile projects, what I'm doing at the start of a sprint is I'm working very collaboratively with the team to work through the prioritized requirements list and work out what it is that the sprint is going to deliver. And so I don't have to document a work package. I still remember the old controlling a stage in Prince and how I used to, so we used to authorize the work package and then receive the work package back. I'm not going to be doing any sort of paperwork. I'm working with the team, probably lots of post-it notes are flying about. But what we're going to work out is, what does that sprint need to create? Be aware of what the future sprints need to create if we're going to get to the end of our increment with something useful for the customer. And then I'm just going to stand back and let the team sort it out for themselves. They're a self-organizing team of experts, and that's the key thing, that I put skilled people together. I'm saying what it is that I want. So I'm talking about the deliverable, the output or the product, if you're a Prince 2 person, that I want. But what I'm not going to get involved in is I'm not going to get involved in exactly how you create it, how many days you spend on various tasks, who you work with. I'm just going to let the team organize that at the very beginning of the sprint. And what you're going to find is that probably the team are going to do quite a lot of breakdown of their work. So if they've got a particular requirement they're going to deliver, they're probably going to break that into various sub-requirements and work out how they're going to allocate that work across the sprint to each other. But as a project manager, it's my job to keep an eye on the bigger picture, which is what are we delivering? How's that going to deliver early return on investment? Have I got all the business involvement that we need to make that a reality? So that's what I'm doing. It's a very different role, I think. Hopefully.
Okay, thanks, Mel. We've got someone working in a large multinational trying to implement agile practices, but it's got some challenges. So working across 3 or 4 different time zones, everything's virtual, and most importantly, very difficult to get business stakeholders on board with agile principles and change their mindsets. So the summary question is, I guess, how can agile be implemented in virtual teams that span the globe?
Well, I think in all of my successful agile adoptions, and I'm not going to claim I'm a genius, because we all have unsuccessful agile adoptions. It sounds like this person's already got quite a few problems. What you have to do, I think, is be absolutely clear on it's creating this plan. I think if you can get the business on board with the fact that what they're getting out of the sort of the increments is something really useful, and therefore they're sort of on board with, oh, actually I'm contributing to something meaningful. You know, this is about intrinsic motivation, isn't it? People will give up their time. They will take part in daily meetings or ad hoc meetings with the project team. They will transfer their knowledge to the team. They will get involved if they are internally motivated. And that internal motivation, number one, we have to make sure that they feel that there's real value and purpose behind what's being created. And if we can get their excitement about that, and that for me, it doesn't matter what time zone, how many different countries I'm working in, if there is a unified agreement where this initiative is creating this big thing, and on the way to that big ultimate delivery, we're going to get this thing fixed, this problem fixed first, and then we're going to fix this next problem, and then we're going to offer this new service out. And if everybody's on board with that pathway, you know, increment by increment, there's real value going into the business, then I think you've got an orientation point, because then people start to get more interested. They can see the real value for what they're doing. I mean, if you want to follow me on LinkedIn and get hold of me and ask me more, I can give you a little bit more, but because we're talking about a very complex piece of consultancy, but keeping it really simple, I think it's that orientation around I'm taking part in something useful and I understand the things that are being created and what I think we're going to see coming out of the first increment, and I understand that's valuable, and then that would lead on to the second increment, and I can understand that's valuable. If you can do that, then you've got something around which you can coalesce the enthusiasm and the energy and the participation of people.
Thanks, Mel. Time for a couple more, I think so. How do you convince your clients not to have a complete and detailed scope from the beginning of the project?
Yeah, that's, you know, there's no getting around it. You see, when I've got a complete scope in front of me, it feels like a complete shopping list. And when you ask me for the money to go and develop that, it is an easier answer. I see that full scope, a detailed specification, if you like, in front of me, and I feel, I know what I'm getting, and I feel, yeah, there's that certainty. You're offering me certainty. Now, what we all know, because we've been through this webinar together, is that actually is a real lie, isn't it? Because actually, all the things that we dream up at the beginning, some of them will work and some of them won't. So it is about smoke and mirrors, really. It's a fantasy that we've been sold, a really good fantasy. So instead, what we need to do is it's all about turning it on its head and selling that to people. And again, it's a very similar answer to the one I've just given, which is that what you need to talk about is not every single element that goes to make up your delivery. What you need to be talking about is exactly what that delivery will look like, how it will operate in the future, who will do what, how it will run, how it will be maintained. Get people excited on and feeling that they have a really deep understanding of exactly what will happen, what you're selling to them, if you like, a new way of working. So give them as much detail as you can. Think through every element of that. That's what you want them to sign off on. All of the features and functions that you then deliver to make that a reality, they can worry less about. So, but they do want to worry about the detail. So being human accepting that they want to worry about the detail, give them the detail, but give them a different type of detail. It's much more about the future way of working and not the thing that they're buying. And certainly from my perspective, I've seen that that's worked very, very well.
Okay, thanks, Mel. We'll wrap up with this one. So any suggestions on the first steps to move towards an agile methodology from waterfall? Where is the best place to start to understand how this can be adopted?
It might sound trite, but first of all, I think do your research, understand Agile. I don't think Agile is as simple as it looks. I think there is a lot of threads to it. So first of all, make sure that you get yourself educated, and also make sure that you've got a cadre of colleagues who are also educated, so you can have an informed discussion. That's the first thing. Second thing, just take something that there's a genuine reason for doing it in an agile way, and that genuine reason is we're not exactly sure how it's going to pan out. Actually, we do want to do quite a lot of work in collaboration with our customers on this. They might be internal customers. That might be a good place to start. So you might be sort of saying, we want to help you put this, develop an app for something. Well, that will be a good thing. You think, well, that's going to give the automation, that's going to give a streamlined process, but we're not exactly sure all the things that we want to put on that app and all the things we want to leave out from it. So that would be a good thing to do. And it's small and it's standalone. I really cannot advise you enough to get something that doesn't sort of have an effect in lots and lots of different departments, lots of different countries in your organization. Just stick with something that's pretty well ring fenced, but get yourselves well educated to begin with, and then make sure that, so you've got a lot of people you can debate your approach to Agile, but find something standalone and have a go at this kind of planning. And it's not as easy as it looks, but once you've got it, you go, I get it now, it becomes obvious. But you will have the first few attempts are quite difficult.
Great, thanks, Mel. Well, conscious of time, so I think we'll have to begin wrapping up there. I think we could have gone on for another hour with all the questions, to be honest. We've got, thanks, Mel. Yep, we've got a final slide with some further info links there. And as I mentioned towards the start, we'll be sending a follow-up email as soon as we've got the recording and slides available online. That's most likely to be Monday. So do look out for that, as we'll include some additional useful links too.
And follow me on, if you want to get hold of me on LinkedIn because you've got a question that wasn't answered, I'm more than happy to give it a go. And I'm going to give the slides to Mark, but I've written up what I've said here as a document, so that if you ever want to, you can cut and paste things from that document to share with people that you're trying to convince to work in an agile way. So look out for those things from Monday.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mel. Okay, I think that's everything. So to wrap up, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. I do hope it's been an interesting and valuable session for you. And many thanks, of course, to you, Melanie, for your insights and expertise today. So thanks again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Friday and the weekend ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you.